And the most important stuff is kind of at the end anyway, so. I'm Andy Jenks. I grew up at my family's cross-country ski area in the Nadnock region called Windblown. My father, who's here in the middle, purchased the property in 1963 when he was 16 to build a cross-country ski area. He slowly built up the land using lumber from the property. For anyone interested, we've got the brochures for the ski area up here. Most of my machine experience started with grooming the snow and the snowcats and farm tractors around the ski area. We've got 25 miles of groomed trails and shelters and cabins that we rent. During the off-season, there's lots of work to do on the ski trails. So eventually we started renting larger excavators for a week at a time to get most of the major work done. These larger machines can do enormous amounts of work with relatively little fuel. Once you get bigger and bigger, the amount of fuel they use actually goes down compared to the amount of work they get done. My father, grandfather, and great-grandfather were all professional farmers in their own way. My grandmother had a great organic garden at her house in Maine that was a big influence on my life. She was almost into permaculture. She had lots of fruit trees, comfrey, chives, hardy kiwis and things, and I actually still use her comfrey that I plant onto clients' properties. Because of their influences, I've got lots of garden beds around my cabin at Windblown. Over the last 3 years I've been building them, and I used an excavator that we rented to build them originally. So hugelkulture, it's one of my favorite methods for creating a garden bed because of the many benefits that it provides our climate. In our climate, we have frozen ground a lot of the year, but hugelkultures can still break down over the winter. So you're not losing all that time that your compost pile really isn't doing anything all winter. It's best to set them up on contour across the hill so that water coming down the hill can soak into them and spread across them. It's also ideal to have them perpendicular to the prevailing winds so that they act as a wind block, especially if you plant trees on top of them. I've made several hugelkultures at my home. You can see here several cords of wood going in, some soil on top, some seashells, and then this is a couple of years later with goji berries and perennial plants and annual plants. Since it's a north-facing hill, it also turns it into a south-facing slope, and then the north-facing slope has more perennials.
Andy, I couldn't quite tell when you had wood down. That's the top left?
Yep, so this is the soil. I originally dug a trench that's on contour, and then put the soil here, filled in the wood, and then the soil will go back on top of the wood.
Okay.
And then more topsoil.
Logs, so I was just wondering.
You'll see a better example later on. There's a big example. These goji berries are planted on the backside of the hugelkulture, and they require almost no irrigation because the water in the logs gets stored throughout the year and wicks up. In 2011, I started my business, Windblown Tree Tractor. I provide a large array of services, and now permaculture has become a large part of the business. In fact, this year, 100% of my excavator jobs will include permaculture earthworks, which was the reason I bought my excavator in the first place. So it's great. I try to educate all my customers about permaculture and the different ways it can benefit their properties, and I've started to convert people over to a permaculture way of thinking. Annual-based agriculture, as we all know, causes many problems when you rip up the soil every single year. And so when we're designing perennial systems, we need to design them so that we don't require the use of large machinery year after year. just use the large machinery to set up the system, and then you can use hand tools later on. And instead of doing hard manual labor in place of the machines allow you to do a lot more work. In some areas of the world, say India or whatnot, it would make sense to use manual labor. But in the United States, machines, they just outproduce the expensive labor costs that we have. This is an aerial view of Mark Shepard's farm in Wisconsin. You can see that it's a very developed system. He used a lot of machinery originally to put in all these swales, and now he just uses a tractor to harvest. He doesn't really need an excavator or anything once the system's installed. And so now this is a job I did this spring for Pete and Diane. Diane is here. It's in just north of Plymouth, New Hampshire. When I got there in April, the entire 3 acres looked like this. Lots of brush and small poplar trees. There was a larger row of trees along the road, but most of it was all 10 to 15-year-old trees. Here's the house site starting to get cleared out. Originally, we were going to put the house kind of towards the left of the picture, but it became obvious once the view was clear that the house should really be moved further out. Things like that, it's really best not to have your design totally fixed until you get there on the site. You start cutting trees down, opening up the soil, seeing what's there. If you have everything planned out ahead of time, it's not going to come out as good as if you're flexible throughout the whole project. A lot of chipping went on this job. I cleared about 1.5 acres of trees, so there were thousands and thousands of trees that got chipped. I used my excavator to feed the wood chipper, which saves on a lot of manual labor hauling around brush. And everything gets powered by waste vegetable oil. I spent a year researching waste vegetable oil and different ways to use it, and 2 years ago I started powering my machines. I power my excavator, my truck, wood chipper, and several cars. I collect all the oil from local restaurants. So, like on the job in Campton, I ended up burning about 300 gallons of vegetable oil, maybe only 50 gallons of diesel fuel, about that ratio. I also use it for bar and chain oil in my chainsaws. It's a very effective way to use it. So now here's the house site, the view from the house site. We still have to take down that one pine tree and a few others, so you can see why they chose the house site. This is looking at the Rumney wind towers. You can see my chipper and the wood chip piles down below there, and just to the left of the wood chip piles is where the pond is going to go. There's a natural depression that brings water in, and I'll be installing several swales to focus the water in on the pond. So here's the pond site. The first step in building the pond is to remove all the good topsoil from the site. This got used to make a level area off to the right. And by the way, if you have any questions, definitely ask them during the presentation. Next, I set up where the dam is going to be located, and I make sure to scrape off all the material and bring it down to really hard, compacted subsoil, so that when you put the new material on, it's not sitting on top of topsoil, it's sitting right on the very hard subsoil. Here you can see the culvert pipe through the dam that can drain the pond. It's down at the bottom of the pond, and it'll get plugged after I'm finished building the pond. And so I find the best clay that I can to put right around the pipe. I was able to find some really pure clay without stones or anything. And so that gets put in the middle of the dam.
Finding clay on site.
Yep, right where the pond, basically under the excavator. There's clay pretty much everywhere in New Hampshire. It's more of just how many rocks are mixed in with it or sand. This was almost 100% clay once you get underneath the topsoil.
What town was that?
Campden, New Hampshire, near Plymouth. And so after the best clay gets put on, then the rest of the clay, and you can see it has a lot of stones and whatnot. And so that's built up almost to the height of the dam. I still have to go around the backside, get up on the dam and smooth it out. And every 6 inches or so, as I'm building the dam up, I'm also compacting it with the excavator so that the dam is as compacted as possible. Usually you don't want soil compacted in your garden, but in the case of a dam, you want it as compact as possible and to be dried out. So we let the pond drain through that pipe for a couple weeks before plugging it so that the dam had enough time to dry out. Here's the finished dam filling with water. That took a few days, but I imagine it's still not much higher than this because it hasn't really rained since then. But I imagine after a winter there'll be enough water to fill it all the way up. There's a swale from the bottom right corner that will lead water into the pond, and there's a swale on the right side that will lead water back out of the pond and regulates the height of the water. Here's the swales above the pond. The top swale is perfectly level, but it's closed on the left side, open on the right side, so that water actually flows down it and comes out of the swale towards the pond. And then the bottom swale is actually a very slight gradient down, because that's the last thing that will bring all the water over to the pond. It only drops about 6 inches. Here's a rock retaining wall that's below the house site. It allows the land above the wall to be flatter, which reduces soil erosion. Here, just above the retaining wall, I've started to dig the foundation for the house and garage. Since it's going to be a walkout basement, the house is positioned so that it acts as another retaining wall, further reducing erosion issues. So that it's a retaining wall, a flat space, than the house, which has the walkout basement, and it's essentially a retaining wall. Here's above the house site, looking at the driveway. You can see how the driveway is perfectly level coming off the street, and then it slopes slightly up to the garage. And that was all planned so that the driveway is as easy to maintain as possible without any hills going up or down, because that's where erosion is going to happen. And here's a movie at the end of the Campton job.
Here's a quick video a week after I finished. When I arrived here, the whole lot was stick.
Have to minimize this.
Bigger, thicker than this. Now we have a view out there. A couple swales at the top of the front.
I think you're going to have to see it on here.
Road runoff.
This is the way it's set up in the presentation view.
Installed a nice short driveway that will be totally level and drive straight into the garage.
Can you see that?
Looking at Tenny Mountain ski area and the windmills in Rumney, New Hampshire. Garage will be right there. Your carport to the left. The mudroom. And a modestly sized, eco-friendly house built by Brian Police. Right here with a nice walkout basement to the south and west. a nice view. There's a little berm over there to protect from road noise. Car headlights. There's a nice retaining wall so that the walkout basement will have a little flat area right outside of it. There's another driveway access point down here for some extra parking and for access to install the septic system, which will go right here. That's why there isn't much here yet. Alright, stop the retaining wall here so that the septic installer can figure out where that ends. But this retaining wall worked out really nicely with the nice sandy clay material from the house site. I was able to lock all the stones together really nicely. It's in an S shape that kind of matches the contour of the land. And then the beginning of a little swale, that's a ditch that comes down into the swale here. And this is totally uncontoured. Still some pretty tall trees, but not any nut trees or trees that are going to get over 30, 40 feet. Now all we need is lots of plants and some rain.
Andy?
The house to be built.
Yep.
That ditch, I'd be afraid that I'd break my leg, so walking through it like,
Uh-huh.
what kind of vegetation or whatever, what do you plan on that looking like? Do people just throw grass
Well, so
in it, or?
mostly why it has to be like that is because it's so steep. This is a really, really steep hill versus Carl and Torrey's, which I'll show later, is a much more gradual hill. It becomes more difficult when you have such steep land and you're going to clear it. And
Right, because otherwise you're terracing.
yeah. The rock retaining wall is another way to go, to actually build retaining walls and then have a swale above that so that you can still fall off the retaining wall, but there isn't the ditch.
Well, I was just curious, I can understand like having something in an agricultural system where people need to learn to be careful, but around a house, I would think,
Yeah.
but they were fine with,
Yeah, these are all-
I would just be so worried.
These are all a couple 100 feet below the house.
Okay.
100 feet below the house, so that right
It's
around
kind
the
of
house there's
deceptive
nothing.
in
Yeah.
this, it looks like it's like really close, so.
Um,
So how are they gonna ditches always need to be maintained, is it something that you would just come back with a machine?
well, most ditches
20
are
years
at an
and
angle.
heals it?
They're all running down the hill, and so that's when water picks up speed and picks up soil particles, creates erosion, and then fills in other areas with that erosion.
Yeah.
So that's why you need to clean out the ditches.
Right.
But swales, since they're totally level, there's not a rush of water. There isn't the erosion happening. And the idea is that you get them planted with cover crops or things so that they're all growing.
Are they gonna plant like trees in the bottom of that ditch?
Probably beneath the...
Beneath it?
Yeah, and I dug a bunch of holes beneath them. I did sow some cover crops like clover or whatnot in the bottoms of the swales.
To stabilize. So that is not something that you should have to go back and maintain like a traditional,
There might be like some weed whacking in the swale.
but with your machine.
No, not with a machine. At most, a little bit of shovel work or something.
Okay, so, that's a huge difference
Yeah.
from
a ditch next to a road.
anyone's ditch. Usually the way
Yeah.
ditching is done in agriculture or even around properties, they have to be.
Partly
cleaned out
a
every-
ditch next to a road, if you continually clean it out, you're continually taking all the plants out too. So
Correct.
there's never a root system in there. Here, the idea is that from now on, there will always be root systems everywhere.
How big is that property?
It's 3 acres, and I cleared about an acre, a little over an acre. So now we're moving on to a job in Jaffrey, which I'm still working on. And my intern Alan Fox here has helped me a lot with. And RCS has also been working there. And so here's at the beginning of the job, I took this video. So it looks at right at Mount Monadnock. You can see the property from the top of Mount Monadnock. It was cleared about 5 years ago when the house built. The homeowners are just starting to really move there full time. So they're putting on an addition, putting on a greenhouse, and hiring me to put in swales in the field. Down there, there's a potential pond site that might happen next year.
Top of the hill. House.
The wind really blows across the landscape straight from Mount Monadnock and across here because they did cut off all the trees. So it's very hard to establish a new tree system with the amount of wind. And especially this year, it was pretty much a desert. And so I waited to plant trees until last week.
About where the snow is being plowed up the driveway. There's a little depression here. So we're gonna make plow of snow.
You can't really hear me, so I'll just talk. With an extended driveway now, with a new garage going in, there'll be more snow plowed. And so I'm designed in a system of where to plow the snow to, so that instead of this convex shape that they have to the hill, if you put a bunch of snow on it, it'll melt in the spring and just run off down the hill. Instead, if you put it into a concave shape, like a small basin, the snow pile will melt and sink into the ground more. And I'll be planting comfrey plants there to allow the roots to open up the soil and have the water drain more. You'll see that all in the video at the end. This just gives you the picture of that. It's just a flat field that's not all that productive. And they're not even mowing it this year because it didn't even really grow much. So here's the Permaculture Design, kind of a rough sketch of the hill. All the red is existing fruit trees. They put in a natural swimming pool that has plants in it to clean the water. You'll see pictures of this hugelkulture being built, and then the snow catchment basin so that all the snow gets plowed up into that. And then it exits and has a whole way of going back and forth across the field. There's a road that I'm building, goes into the woods and around to a possible intern tiny house site, and the intern will be able to access it around there without disturbing the homeowners. And there's some separation there. The homeowners are going to put another array of solar panels. It's a totally off-the-grid house. So as with almost every job, it starts with tree work, because you really don't want to plant fruit trees underneath trees that are going to have to come out in the next 10, 20 years. So you want to make sure that you do all your tree work first. Here there were a dozen pine trees that were very twisty. They weren't going to survive more than 20 years. So hugelkulture, it's a great tool when you have lots of low quality wood that you need something to do with. Otherwise you'd probably be paying somebody to take the waste wood away, or hiring somebody to chip it. Hugelkultures break down very slowly. This one would be 10, 20 years. So here I'm just starting to take all the topsoil off of where I'm digging the hugelkulture. Here's from the other direction. The prevailing winds come from the right, so that this is being built not just on contour to capture the water, but the winds will have to lift up and over this, especially once trees get planted around it.
Andy, is there a preference for softwood versus hardwood for that?
Definitely, ideally hardwood, but softwood is fine.
And was it primarily softwood?
It was
That's
a
what
whole
you
mix.
Okay.
Really, it's not as important as you might think. People also talk about fresh wood versus dead wood, because wood does have a natural antifungal thing to it, and it also takes nitrogen when it's drying out. And so some people suggest leaving your wood to dry for at least a few weeks or a few months. In this case, I'm putting in a whole mix of things, a lot of pine trees, but then also a lot of 4-year-old dead hardwood trees, and then a lot of wood chips. And you don't really want to use just wood chips or just big things. You want a mix of different size materials so that it breaks down quickly and slowly.
Do you use much like, well, in the winter you don't have leaves, but if you were cutting the trees when leaves are on, do you do something different with that brush, or is that something that also
It can all go in.
it? Okay.
You know, I like to sort out the bigger stones as I dig so that they don't go back in, because there's really no reason to have large stones. We use those to build a retaining wall next to the pool. Here it is completely dug out. It's almost 100 feet long, about 10 feet wide, and it's ready for wood. So I put mostly the pine down lower so that I could have the hardwood up higher. Here's some brush. And so once I put on a layer of logs, I then bring in wood chips so that I can fill in all the voids around the logs so there's no air. If you have too much air in the hugelkulture, it'll start to settle over time, but if you do a good job of actually filling in all the voids, it shouldn't settle at all. And so then I use the excavator to smash all the wood chips down amongst the logs, and then put more logs on, and use a chainsaw to cut up the logs into pieces that will fit tighter together. And these are
So you're being really careful about it.
Yeah.
You're not just dumping stuff in, you're really trying to put
It's
it
not
in
like a
compacted.
stump dump. In other places on the property, there's several stump
Yes.
dumps, and it's just kind of jumbled in there. And if you go walking out there, you have to watch out for falling down into the holes, because there's holes that have developed and they go down 5 feet.
It's dangerous.
But this, there won't be anything going into it besides water. Here's a really twisty pine log that you'd never get any money for. You could sell it as pulp, but you really don't get money for it. So this is a great way to use it. I finally got my tractor on site with a grapple rake and stump grinder to move wood from the woods over to here, and wood from the woods over to the chipper. Pretty much any wood that would fit through my chipper I chipped, and wood that was too big for my 10-inch chipper got put into the hugelkulture. And so after a layer of wood, logs and brush, more wood chips, more smashing it in. And more wood chips. We did a lot of chipping that day. And I didn't want to just push all the wood chips in, I wanted to have the right ratio, so I brought more logs over and other debris, and then put the wood chips on top of that. And I get right on the hugelkulture to put the weight of the excavator on and run back and forth on it. And then here's a layer of subsoil, the clay that was put on top of the wood. That way some of those minerals and things are mixed in throughout the hugelkulture. So now here's another layer. This is old firewood that was starting to rot. I had actually cut the trees down 4 or 5 years earlier. And then wood chips to go on top of that. And now working on the other end of the hugelkulture. permaculture with more wood, a few large stumps, more soil, more chips, brush.
When you mentioned that one end of the hugelkulture was open and the other end was closed in the previous job, what did you really mean?
I'm just working from one end to the other, partly because I wanted to take a picture that's coming up of the whole thing where you can see kind of a finished end in the middle and then the exposed end. So here I'm moving the wood chipper with my tractor. You can see that it's kind of a unique wood chipper where it has its own chip box attached to it, and the wood chipper can spin. Here's the final layer of wood chips on this end before I'm covering it with soil. I put at least 6 to 10 inches on top of the subsoil, and then there'll be more topsoil put on top of that. And then here's some topsoil compost material. So here's this picture that you can see the hole dug out, lots of wood being built up. There's some horse manure that got thrown in, and then subsoil, you can see the clay, and then topsoil.
Is there an advantage to having it a mound and not just kind of level or only slightly?
Yeah, partly for this instance, the wind, it'll act as a thing to bump the wind up, because the rest of the permaculture system is downwind from this. The mound also provides different microclimates. On the top is going to be a little bit different than on the side, so you could plant drier loving species on top and things that need more moisture further down, or on the north side versus the south side. Also, having it be a mound increases the surface area. If you have 1 acre of flat land, you have 1 acre. If you have 1 acre of hugelkulture that's going up and down, you can have 2 acres on top of your 1 acre of land. So it's a way of increasing the amount of land that you have. So just more and more wood, and then gets smashed down with the excavator. A lot of the rotten wood can break down really easily. This is a early morning shot. My intern and I did lots of 5 a.m. mornings because it was a very hot month, I believe, a record hot. And now this side is finished, ready for soil. And I use just the same soil that came out of the hole to go back on top, and the same amount. Here's some topsoil that I gathered from other areas where the snow catchment basin went. I took all the topsoil off of that, put on the hugelkulture. And now it'll be finished off with several dump truck loads of topsoil and planted with all sorts of perennials and a line of wind blocking trees. So that was about a month of work, of tree work, cleaning out the woods to make it so there weren't trees that were going to fall down on the fruit trees we're about to plant, and to make the woods a lot more inviting. There's now a nice little picnic site in that road, and a lot of sugar maple trees that I cleaned out around for a future sugar bush. I start out by staking out the contour lines in the field using a laser level. I actually staked them out at the beginning of the job so that when I was working I could kind of visualize the swales for a month and really make sure I wanted them right there. And then I dig out the swales with the excavator. I just kind of dig out the trench and put the soil on the lower side and smooth everything out. And as I'm doing that, I'm picking out all the bigger stones. We picked out about 6 or 7 dump trailer loads of stones from these swales. And here you can see a rainstorm happened and filled up the swales. You can see it spreading out along the swale and sinking slowly over the next day or so. And these swales will be able to hold about 6 to 8 inches of water. So for a 100-yard long swale, that's thousands of gallons of water. Here I'm digging holes for the trees. It would take about a minute to dig a hole, and that includes pulling out 3 or 4 large stones that would take half an hour to dig by hand. So when you're planting 50 to 100 trees, it really adds up. It can be really beneficial to have a machine. And in rocky New Hampshire soil, a post-hole digger is not going to pull up the stones that you need to get out of the hole. Because you really don't want to plant fruit trees on top of a big stone, and you want to be able to loosen up the soil all around the hole. Here I'm bringing some plants over. Getting some trees ready for their new home. And I saved some wood chips from the hugelkulture to be able to use as mulch next to the trees. So the whole swale got about 6 inches of mulch on the whole thing. And then I used my fertilizing machine to soak in the trees as you're planting them, because you want a little erosion event to happen to fill the soil in amongst the tree roots. If you just leave air gaps down in there, the tree roots can dry out. So you want to thoroughly water them in as you plant. And then I also fertilize them with fish and seaweed and mycorrhizal products. So here's the finished swale. It's planted out, fruit trees and mulberry trees and cornelian cherries.
My question is, you can see all 3 swales now.
Yep. So there's this upper swale and this lower swale, and then down below the tractor there's another swale. And it's set up so that the top swale, when it overflows, it fills up the next swale, and then that overflows and fills up the next swale. So there'll be a video coming up that will explain all this. Is there any other questions?
Is there a rough guide like how big the swale should be based on catchment area?
You definitely have to think about the catchment area and the steepness. You don't want your swales to be too big so that the downslope gets steep. These swales, I've used a bigger bucket, and so they're 3 feet wide. Since we're at the very top of the hill here, the catchment area is actually pretty small, so these probably won't overflow too often. But like in the springtime or a heavy rain event, they'll definitely overflow.
When they overflow, you just plant it to go downhill?
Yeah, you plant it so that there's one spot that it overflows in.
Okay.
There's different ways to do that. You can have it overflow the whole swale if you wanted evenly, but in this case, like in this picture, at the very end there's going to be a barn there, so I didn't want water to overflow into the barnyard. So it's actually a closed-ended swale where that end of the swale doesn't allow water to come out, but on this end closer is open, so that water, when it fills up the swale, even though it's totally level, it fills up and exits one side, and there'll be some flow, but very gradual, not to the point where erosion happens or whatnot. And so we planted out these swales with a mixture of field peas, oats, hairy vetch, clover. There's some radishes that are meant to break open the soil. And so anything you can do to have more roots in the swale to open up the soil, allow that water to flow into the land. And so,
You're sowing those right in the ditch?
yeah,
Those crops?
we just use a little broadcast spreader that you wheel down and just the next rainstorm will kind of fill up the soil with water, soak the seeds, and they'll start to sprout. Even when it's dry, I find that in the bottoms of the swales, seeds can sprout pretty easily. So now I'm going to show you the video. It's at the end of this job. But I want it on the big screen, so I'm going to...
And for anyone who came in late over on the school is some worksheets of the key points in the presentation.
How long have you been doing this?
I started my business tree climbing in 2011, but it was about 3 years ago I bought my excavator, and that was specifically to do permaculture work with. I took the Permaculture Design course at D-Acres in 2014, and so it's just kind of been building, and I guess building momentum is the theme. And so this year it's really taken off, and it's pretty much what I do now.
What's the project cost, like the one we just saw?
So the main cost in all this is the tree work, because it's just expensive having the equipment, and it's really time-consuming chipping. And so if you don't have to do the tree work, this can be very cheap. Like the swale system, only a matter of a few $1,000s. But because of a month of tree work, it puts it over 20 grand. Most farmers are going to be able to do their own tree work. So if it's like a farm situation I'm showing up to, I'm not going to be doing the tree work and all that. I'll just do the swales.
So did you already have some of the tree equipment before you got into it?
Yeah, I bought the tractor from my dad and got some implements like the grapple rake and the stump grinder slowly over time. The wood chipper a couple years ago, which was a huge, it was a great thing to do. Wood chips are a huge commodity that people, like the job in Campton, I sent some wood chips to Brian Felice and some other people, Steve Whitman, because everybody can use wood chips. Last year I brought home several hundred yards of wood chips to my own compost piles, and that was really beneficial. Julie, you want to work on this?
What's the make on that chipper you have? That's pretty sweet.
What's the, so that's there were only 6 of them ever built. It's got a chip box in the back, so it dumps out nicely, and then the chipper is mounted on the front of the trailer, and it can pivot from side to side. So you can go down a road and just feed it from the side. It works out really well. It's a 10-inch wood chipper, so you can put really everything you need to in it. For permaculture work, you generally want smaller diameter wood anyway. Anything under 5 centimeters is called lineal wood chips. And since it has all the bark going around, the smaller diameter of wood, there's a lot more nutrients. I could definitely use a bigger chipper, but for permaculture work, 10 inches is perfect. So here's the end of the Jaffrey job.
Sure. It's Friday, August 19th. Here's an almost completed hugelkulture, which doesn't look like much now, but you'll see the pictures. There's a lot of wood buried in there. The cap all the water from the top of the hill and soaks it in. Foundation has been poured for the addition of the new garage. So there'll be lots of snow to plow from the larger driveway. That will all get plowed here into this snow catchment area.
Andy, would they do like a
I still
rain
have to
garden
move any
planting
gravel.
of herbaceous stuff in
And
there?
in this area,
They
the
could,
plow
yeah.
truck will drive up and over.
The plow truck will have to still be able to
It
plow.
will be built up to the top of the dam height. And there'll be gravel put on top of all these rocks. I have a road going into the woods.
And that's on contour, the road itself.
So the snow plow truck will plow the snow up and over a little berm here, down into the snow catchment basin. There'll be plants like comfrey planted in the basin to get irrigated, and the roots will help the water dive into the soil. Comfrey loves to have lots of water. They'll be able to harvest lots of comfrey at the top of the system here.
Which is the best fertilizer.
The highest point around here is their roof, and they're planning to put on a water catchment system of gutters all the way around the house and the new addition. There'll be a large tank behind the solar panels that can flood irrigate any of these swales, and the overflow of which will overflow into this pond. So a large rain event, this pond will fill up quickly. The exit of this goes into this swale. The swales will be finished at the end of the job, going over to the tree line, but I still need access for the next few weeks. So the water will back flood over to the tree line, and then when it fills up the swale, over here, this can be adjusted with a shovel. Flows into this swale.
And I can pause if people have questions.
Here's the road. I plan on putting a culvert under the road at this point, but high enough so that there's a small amount of water that floods this area and can back flood down this side of the road a little bit. Just more water storage and sinking capacity.
Were those rocks
So once it
pulled out
goes
of
under
the
the road,
additional walls?
it'll drop into this swale, it'll back flood down over to the tree line, and then the low point of the swale is right here. When it fills up, the water will overflow down into the next swale. This next swale is totally level, non-contour. It'll capture all the water that runs off from the road, which is a hard surface. There'll be plants along here, but there'll still be lots of water rushing off of that hard surface in the middle of rainstorms. So the swale is closed on this side, meaning water can't flow out of it. So when it fills up, the water will start to flow this way, even though it's totally level. Water will flow down, sinking into the ground underneath these trees. And then over here near the tree line will be a low point in the swale. The swale will be open, essentially on this end. Closed on the other end, open on this end. So that when it fills up, it can overflow and flow down to this swale. This swale will get extended over to the tree line. side where it is closed as well. And then the water will flood this way, overflow, and flow down to the next swale, which will also be extended. But this swale, instead of being closed at one end and open at the other, it's going to be able to be open at both ends. And then with a shovel, you can adjust the height of either end if you want water to exit on the other side or this side. We have a row of trees and mulch. And then any water that makes it down here will get captured by this road. A road from up above loops through the woods, drops down in elevation, and comes out here. There's a spot here for an intern housing, such as a tiny house that has privacy from the homeowner, yet is close to the permaculture system. This road is slightly sloping downhill, move water this way, and then it will become on contour and go around the field. That way all the water from the woods and the field will get moved this direction to the other side of the field. It'll go under the road and down a little ditch to where the future pond site is.
So here's a pile of stones that got dug out, but not put on the road yet. There were probably a pile of stones like that every 50 feet. Yep.
Up, the water will start to flow this way, even though it's
I
totally
just
level.
wanted to stop it in a few
Next
places.
few weeks. It's this area, and can back flood.
So you can see the 3 swales there in the road, and we're looking at the side of the swales that are closed-ended, because the barn site will be here. And do people understand how that works with the water moving down to one side of the swale, and then the swale will actually fill up with water at least 6 or 8 inches before it starts to overflow. So the first inch of rain is going to just fill up the swales. The next inch of rain is then going to start overflowing. And these top 2 swales bring the water away from the barn site, but that bottom swale actually is below the barn site, and all the nutrients and water from the barn will get captured by that swale. So if there's animals with manure out around the barn site, when the rain comes, it'll wash all that nutrient-dense water into the swale and then distribute it all along the swale. And so that swale is open-ended on both sides, so that if there's too much water on the left side, they can shovel some dirt in the way of that water and open up the other side, and the water will get to the pond a little quicker. But if it works out and they can send the water the other direction and then it goes back to the pond via the road, then that would be great too. Any questions?
I just thought you might mention question about your compost tea machine.
Sure. I don't have a picture of it, but I have a 100-gallon compost tea brewer that works really well. It has an industrial air pump on it to push lots of air bubbles through the water, and then several baskets that hold compost that you put your best aerated compost into, and you run it for about 24 hours. You put in some other things like molasses for the microbes to eat, and the compost tea brewer can double the number of microorganisms in the water every 20 minutes. And so brewing it for 24 hours, you can turn a few billion microorganisms into many, many billions of microorganisms. And things like biochar can also be put into the compost tea to be inoculated. And then I use my fertilizing machine to deep root soil inject the compost tea or other fertilizers into the root systems of a tree. Or you can foliar feed trees with the compost tea. And it creates a biofilm on the leaf surfaces of the trees. All the microorganisms actually protect the leaves. And so compost tea is, haven't perfected it yet, but it will be a huge part of the systems. And really a system that's this big really should have a dedicated compost tea brewer living there on site. And because I've planted about 50 trees, but there'll be room for at least 100 or 200 trees. Any other questions?
What tool do you like to use for site analysis? Like you had that map up earlier.
Yeah,
the
so
contour lines and everything.
that was basically Google SketchUp. It
Okay.
has a program in it where you can download Google imagery, and then you can put the elevation model onto that.
Okay.
So you have a 3D image of the land, and then you can put the contour lines on relatively easily. You can look up ways online of how to add the contour lines into Google SketchUp. And so that topo map took 10 minutes to make versus going out and measuring the whole land with a robotic instrument or something like a surveyor would. But as you maybe saw on that slide, the contour lines didn't quite line up with my actual swales. Because my swales, I definitely make sure to design them on land with a laser level, so that you can't trust the topo map.
Right, my deep.
Because these swales, the laser level is accurate to within 1/8 of an inch or so. And so if you're an inch off, that might mean the swale is a little further a foot down or something because the land is gently sloping down. And you just want to make sure that you're on contour, and afterwards you want to double check that the bottom is relatively even, but especially the top of the swale, because that's what's going to hold the water in. If you have one low spot, that's where it's going to flow out.
Andy, do you want to talk about your biodiesel and what it's like to be down under the front fire?
So, waste vegetable oil has been working out really well, both in my excavator, but mostly my truck and wood chipper. I collect the oil from several restaurants that give it to me for free. So I collect several thousand gallons a year, and I have a centrifuge that heats up the oil and then spins it at 6,000 RPM, and it totally cleans the oil and takes out all the water. And then I filter a little bit, and it goes right into a separate tank on each machine. It has two tanks, the diesel tank and the vegetable oil tank, so that you can start the machine on diesel fuel and then use the heat from the engine to heat up the vegetable oil. And then once the engine's warm, you switch over to vegetable oil. You run for the whole day. Like an excavator is a great machine because you turn it on and run it the whole day. And then 15 minutes before I'm going to shut down the machine, I switch back to vegetable oil and burn out all the vegetable oil so that it's running on diesel before I shut off the machine. My truck is even better at burning it, and I can purge in less than a minute. So even short trips around town, I can still burn vegetable oil.
You still run it in cold.
Yeah, well, I don't in my excavator or the chipper, because I just haven't put the time into the system, but my truck, it has coolant heat that heats a flat plate heat exchanger, then it heats the hose going down to a heated coolant filter head, and then there's a pump, and the pump also heats the oil, and then there's a heated pickup in the stock tank that coolant goes down into the tank, heats up the vegetable oil, and comes back out. So even at negative 10 degrees, I was able to run my truck on vegetable oil. And you get pretty much the same fuel mileage as diesel. You really can't notice any difference. It does smell like vegetable oil burning, French fries. But the best use of it is actually in barn chain oil, because that goes for $10 to $15 a gallon. And so clean waste vegetable oil poured right into your chainsaw lubricant works really well. And it's biodegradable versus petroleum-based barn chain oil is definitely not good. In the future, once my mushroom beds start producing mushrooms, I plan on collecting the spores from the mushrooms and putting that in the barn chain oil so that whenever you cut a tree down, you're also inoculating wood with spores. Yeah.
It's not really off topic, but have you ever been a good resource to go to? Because I was thinking of building my own compost tea brewer, and it seems like there's a lot of good and bad information out there.
So, like compostworks.com, W-E-R-K, that's where I buy my compost tea ingredients. And they have some components you can buy, a little pricier, but they just use normal tote and then have their system in the tote. My compost tea brewer is called Growing Solutions. And it works pretty well. There's 4 air stones in the bottom that put a massive amount of oxygen into the water.
It sounds pretty neat.
Yeah.
I've never seen anything like that.
People can do smaller systems just in a 5-gallon bucket with an air stone, and that's enough compost tea for most gardens. If you do a really good job of brewing the tea, you can mix it 10 parts water to 1 part tea, and it can go a lot further. So you do have to start with good compost that was made aerobically, because you want to just have aerobic bacteria for your compost tea. There's also actively aerated compost piles, which would be ideal, where you have a fan blowing air underneath your compost pile so that just your normal compost pile gets aerated, and you don't have to flip the compost pile. Then it can just be a static compost pile. People have been testing that out in really big systems where they have diesel air blowers powered by diesel blowing air into thousands of yards of compost at a time, and they found that it's beneficial.
So maybe mention how you use your machines for making compost.
So I also collect lots of manure from different farms, and then all of the wood chips I bring back from doing tree jobs, they get combined, and I mix them with excavator or the tractor, flip them. And then I have a soil screener that runs on electricity to clean up the compost, take out the bigger stones and things. Little compost factory. It's not like your highest quality kitchen waste compost. Once you start putting wood chips and things in, it's a little rougher, but it'll be a more microbial compost if you have wood. versus bacterial. And with the compost tea, you can also have microbial compost tea or bacterial compost tea, depending on what you're putting it on. If you're using it on fruit trees and whatnot, you want the microbes. And the mushroom mycelium also gets growing in there. And so it's really nice to have a wood-based compost for that. Any other questions?
Have you had experiences building terraces, many terraces?
Yes, I actually have another video.
It's only 2 minutes.
Yeah, it's a 1 minute long video. This is Brian Felice's property. I did a year ago. This was a big jumble of stones.
That really big one in the middle.
So you chose to do
One of the others,
terracing
no
over
stone.
swales?
Yeah,
Bluff over there, it's gravel. Over here, it's all big jump.
so up at the top there's an access road that comes in from here to go across on contour. And then below that is a swale that actually leads from a little pond and back floods water up about 100 yards down. And I built up the rock retaining walls below it. And so there's the retaining wall there, a level space, retaining wall there, a level space, retaining wall there, level space, retaining wall. And so that's kind of,
your terrace.
those are about 5 feet tall each. So
Well, I'm at width.
oh, the width is about 6 or 8 feet.
What was the slope of the hill? I mean, that suggests that it was pretty steep.
It was pretty steep, yeah. And I kind of showed the other hill was all gravel, didn't have the rocks. And at first I thought that was the hill that was going to come out really nice and for permaculture, but because it didn't have the rocks, we weren't able to build the terraces, and it's really steep, and this side of the hill turned out much better with the rock.
At that slope, you needed a retaining wall rather than just a vegetated.
Definitely, because it just would have been too steep. It would have been almost vertical earthen walls that would have eroded. And so the rock was great to move in. And so the water comes from this direction and sinks into the hill, and there's actually a little way for it to then drop down here. There's a flat spot, it drops down again, comes here, and then this is actually a little duck pond that overflows here and takes the water away from the house site.
Was the rock already existing on the property?
It was all just
So
like
you didn't have
where
to
it
bring
is.
anything in?
Yeah. And I had to move several of the big boulders, kind of digging out places for them to go and tipping them over. And, rock can definitely be very beneficial to work with, even if it's just a single line of stones on the ground.
Where is this property?
This is in Rumney, New Hampshire. Brian Felice, who gave the last talk here.
So you guys can continue the conversation